Morning. Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Hey, Katie. Hello. Hello, good morning. It's time for coffee. Coffee, coffee, coffee. And then we will read, etc. and so on, etc., 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 as Yul Brenner would say. It was, oh, excuse me, hey Roxy. Yes, can't wait to discuss those. Yes, I usually don't have sound until book club starts. Secret husband is still sleeping in the other room, but that's okay. We will book club it up, and then we will continue on with our day. I made so much base slime yesterday, you guys. I made cloud base, thick and glossy base, clear base, butter base, so many bases, and shipped a bunch of orders. Yesterday was a very productive and successful day, so that's good. Very good. Today we have Roll for Slime After Dark. You found me yesterday? Oh, fun. Well, welcome. Did you cover all of them? Well, that's different, Roxy. So, like, when we make bases for you guys, it's different than when I make individual slimes just for me. Yeah, it's different. They're in those big bins with the click covers. Beautiful. Look at that coffee. Look at that coffee. Delicious. It is book time. Well, almost. We're real close. I'm going to the office tomorrow and I have to miss book club. That's the saddest news of the week, Liz. But the good news is I'll upload it for you, so at least you'll get to enjoy it in the afternoon. You know. All right. Yes, coffee first. We have to have coffee. We have to have coffee. All right. I know, but it's a holiday party, so I have to make my quarterly appearance. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty normal, right? I think. You know. It's pretty normal. Some comments were filtered to protect the community experience. Beans. Beans. Good morning, Ray. Good morning, Avery. Just making coffee so that we can read our book. The frother is frothing. Thank you. This cup was a gift from my friend Shira. What I was going to tell you guys is I have had the same song stuck in my head for 14 hours. No matter what else I listen to, Kelly Clarkson's Wrapped in Red will not leave my mind. There's nothing I can do at this point. It's just there. It's stuck. Yeah, 14 hours we're going on now. So I love Kelly Clarkson. Look, don't get me wrong. And I love Christmas music, but maybe we could shuffle. "14 hours just feels excessive for one song." Wait, sorry, it's not Wrapped in Red, it's Underneath the Tree. It's her song Underneath the Tree. She has, the album is called Wrapped in Red. The song is called Underneath the Tree. Yeah, I need to do that, Ray. I need to do that. Oh, okie dokie. We're reconfiguring. Yes, Shira, speak to me. Maybe after you listen to clips of Tiny Graphtail Switch, maybe. Did you get my text and my package? Probably, but I have been so swamped I haven't had time to do anything but work. I worked until 10 p.m. last night and then just passed out. So possibly, but I cannot make any promises about literally anything. I am the tiredest of the tired and the swampiest of the swamps. It's that time of year when all you can do is just work and get it all done. And today we have roll for slime, which meant I had to prep all the bases yesterday. Luckily we did get all 4 bases done, so that's good. Everything is ready to go. I did so many custom and roll for slime videos yesterday, you guys. Those take so long. Okay, I believe you, Shira. I believe you. I'm just trying to get through each day, you know what I mean? It's on YouTube tonight, Avery. Yeah, After Dark always has to be on there because, you know, I have to be able to age lock it, which is totally fine. Yeah, I think people don't realize how long the roll for slime videos take. They take a long time. It's like a good 40 minutes for each one. Yeah. So it's a long process, you know. Making slime is fast, but like setting up the whole thing and then like doing each of the rolls and making sure that you edit it. I got your slime guide in 11. I'm a pre-K teacher. Oh, that's exciting. I love when teachers use the slime guide. I have suggested that everyone who is a teacher share it with their schools. Yeah, you know, with the other teachers in your school and all that jazz. I see why lives make more sense. Yes, the lives make more sense because I don't have to do any editing and there's not like individual setup for each one, yada yada, you know, so I can just even, I mean, you guys see how long they take on the lives. We usually get, these days we usually get like maybe 5 plus a group done in 2 hours. So it's still a long time for each one, right? Like when you think about it, like evening out the time, it's still a while, but it's not as much as when it's a video and I have to edit it, because that takes a long time. Because obviously I have to, like, it's not that I'm editing anything out. Like, you guys get the footage, but like there's dead air, so you have to edit out the dead air. Like if I step away to grab something, or if you know, secret husband opens the door, or if I need to speed something up so that it fits into the time frame, because Instagram and YouTube only accept things that are under a certain time limit, so it has to be shorter. And it's like, you know, it's just it's a whole thing. Then I have to do the voiceover. Anyway, you don't need to hear me complain. Let's just read. So we're gonna read chapter 7 today, and chapter 7, just so you guys know, the chapters don't have titles. I haven't been like skipping giving you all titles or anything like that. There just literally aren't any titles. It just says 7. So that's what's up, and let's go. In case you missed yesterday, they are at Shabbat dinner at the Rubenstein Goldblatt home. We haven't started reading yet, Julia, so don't stress about that. With the final recitation of the Birakat Hamazon, the blessing over the meal, the last of the guests trickled from the living room and returned home. With an early morning ahead of him at shul, Rabbi Goldblatt said goodnight and retired to his bedroom. Jacob remained in the dining room, helping Dr. Rubenstein put away dishes. Wearing a smock, Rachel stood quietly in the kitchen, rinsing plates mindlessly and staring out a window. It was hard to believe she was the same little girl who had broken his heart. The last time he'd seen Rachel was when they were 12 years old. It was down by the lake, long after lights out, and when the only people up were the kitchen staff blasting the radio while they finished cleaning dishes. Crazy in Love by Beyonce drifted over the water. Back then, she was a skinny girl in braces, an adolescent nowhere near womanhood. With a penchant for hot pink shorts and high ponytails, he had a picture of the two of them embedded in his mind from that night. The way she looked, spitting cherry bubblegum into her hand and telling him she was ready. The cheesy way he tried to be suave, pointing out the stars and constellations in an effort to wrap an arm around her and pull her a little closer. God, he was so nervous back then. He felt the same way now, on edge, antsy, 1,000 tiny bubbles floating up from his feet and into his chest. Rachel Rubenstein Goldblatt was no longer skinny. The sneakers and banged-up knees he remembered had been replaced by voluminous curves and impractical shoes. But the eyes were the same, brown and flecked with little bits of gold inside. Like they were holding on to some sort of secret treasure. He would recognize those eyes anywhere. Here you go, Jacob said, handing her a plate. Wordlessly, she took it from him. What had happened between them at dinner? Jacob couldn't be certain, though he knew something had shifted inside her. Her face was a mask, her demeanor stone. She'd shut herself down and stopped engaging. He so desperately wanted to talk to her, to use the quiet that had finally appeared in the Rubenstein Goldblatt household, to catch up with her after all these years, maybe even ask her what the hell had happened between them, but she looked tired. Lovely, of course, but even without arriving to Shabbat dinner with stains on her blouse, she'd clearly had a rough day. And yet, here she was, tending to other people's needs rather than her own. It was so much like Rachel Rubenstein Goldblatt he remembered from summer camp, the way she always worried about others offering her water bottle when some camper forgot to trudge theirs along, the way she sacrificed herself constantly, choosing to stay behind after morning minyan, picking up sidurs, instead of racing off to breakfast with everyone else. She was so incredibly thoughtful and sensitive and good, and the thought sparked his imagination once again. She also had this side that was so perfectly naughty. She didn't show it to most people, but it was there, like those flecks of gold in her eyes and the red in the brown of her hair. If you looked at her long enough, cared to really notice, she would show you the truth of who she was. But in the meantime, however, he just wanted to make her life easier. She was still his first love, after all. Even if she did completely break his heart, stomp all over his trust, and compound the abandonment of his father with her cruel and unrelenting silence, he guessed he owed her something. Grabbing an apron off the hook on the wall, he put it on, and he moved to rectify the situation. Hey, will you let me do that? Jacob said.
Rachel returned from wherever she was in her mind. What? You look tired. Jacob smiled gently before attempting to make a joke. And I look amazing in an apron. She didn't even crack a smile. I'm fine. Rachel continued washing dishes, and Jacob chewed on his lower lip in frustration, his frustration with her growing. There she went, shutting him down again. It was disconcerting, really, the way that she completely ignored him, how she gazed out the window, not even blinking, like he wasn't standing centimeters away from her. It didn't make any sense, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was completely and totally pissed off at him about something. Rachel? Jacob said carefully. Is everything okay? Yeah, fine. Because if I've done something to upset you, she tossed a dish into the drying rack and let it clatter. Jacob cracked his jaw. Rachel was obviously not fine. In truth, her attitude was beginning to bug him. It wasn't just the way she was treating him, like he had no more value in this world than a piece of gum stuck to the bottom of her shoe. It was her silence. Jacob hated being ignored like that. It reminded him of his father. Anyway, her open hostility toward him made no sense. If anyone had the right to be angry about what happened at Camp Ahava and to still hold grudges after all these years, it was him. Rachel was the one who had stood him up at the final dance, after all. Emma, Rachel said, finishing the last plate, is there anything else you need me to do? No, honey. Oh, wrong voice. Oh my gosh. Madam Weatherbury just came out of that. No, honey, you go get some sleep. Rachel took off her apron, kissed her mother goodnight, and headed for her bedroom. Watching the door shut behind her, Jacob recognized the same crumpling feeling that he had felt standing alone on the dance floor, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand, the painful realization that Rachel, his first love, his first kiss, had abandoned him. It hurt almost as much as the unanswered phone calls and letters that had followed. It was terrible to be abandoned by the people you loved, even worse when it happened repeatedly. Yeah, Madam Weatherbury came out and we needed Lucy. That's right, we did. Wrong voice. Guys, I only have so many cast of characters in my vocal repertoire, and we just reuse them constantly in every book. Maybe there was something broken inside Jacob, some great flaw that Rachel and his father had seen, which Dr. Rubenstein in all her warmth and kindness thankfully did not see. Yeah, everyone seems to have disappeared on us, Jacob said. Dr. Rubenstein glanced up from the stack of betches she was organizing. Don't take it personally. Erin simply has to be up early in the morning for shul, but we had a wonderful time with you this evening. We're both so honored to be able to attend your Matzah ball. Well, you two make a good team. Dr. Rubenstein grinned. Oh, don't we? Before this evening, he had never met the famous Rabbi Goldblatt, but it struck Jacob how different Dr. Rubenstein was from her husband. She could sashay around a room, sweet potato kugel in one hand and a bottle of kosher wine in the other, treating every guest like an honored visitor. Her friendliness was contagious. Rabbi Goldblatt was the opposite, a scholarly type, known for his uplifting sermons. He was far more comfortable with hours spent locked away in his study than offering someone a hug. It blew Jacob's mind that two people so clearly opposite from one another could ever make a marriage work. But they did. They complemented each other perfectly, two halves of one heart, designated by the heavens. Bashert. Jacob wanted what they had one day, and Rachel? Jacob asked nervously. Oh, what about Rachel? Dr. Rubenstein asked curiously. Jacob rubbed the back of his neck. Well, she barely talked to me at dinner. Dr. Rubenstein sighed heavily. Oh, Rachel's always been more like her father, I'm afraid. But don't judge her too harshly. She has a good heart and good intentions, even when they are terribly misguided. We should have given her more room to grow. Jacob noted a tinge of regret in her voice. Well, you seem like perfectly good parents to me. Oh, Jacob, Dr. Rubenstein said, cupping his cheek with her hand. Nobody is perfect, least of all me. Dr. Rubenstein gave Jacob one last hug before departing, and Jacob remained in the kitchen, back pressed up against the sink. Even though it was nearing midnight and the entire house had scurried off to bed, he dreaded returning to the guest room that Dr. Rubenstein had arranged for him. He could blame jet lag, but Jacob was used to shuffling between time zones, so in reality, he was searching for something to do. Suddenly, the Shabbat timer on the living room and kitchen lights switched off, and Jacob was plunged into darkness. With no other options left, he did retire to the guest room. Sitting down on the bed, Jacob reached for his carry-on bag and pulled out his phone. He had an instinct to text Shmuel and let him know how things had progressed smoothly. Rabbi Goldblatt had agreed to recite the blessing and light the 8th candle at the Matzah ball. Their one-of-a-kind Hanukkah party would now have the blessing of a world-famous rabbi. It was all good news, all around. But on second thought, Jacob decided against it. Shmuel took the laws of Shabbat seriously, unless... Gosh, I'm going to mess up this word. Mosaic? I think it's Moshiach. Mosaic himself was arriving with trumpets blaring. He would not wanted to have been bothered. Even then, it was a little iffy. Besides, Jacob was trying to be more observant too. You weren't supposed to use your phone on Shabbat. You weren't supposed to watch TV or even touch a light switch. All of these things, though Jacob couldn't explain how, were considered work. The silence that fell over the house during a Shabbat was magical. The problem was, Jacob hated quiet. It had been that way ever since he was a child. At least when there was noise, his father was storming out of the house, his mother was crying herself to sleep, he could convince himself that in this tiny little world in New York City, everything would remain the same. Nobody was pulling him out of school or moving him across the Atlantic. When it was quiet, when his bubby closed the door to his bedroom and had long talks with him into the night with his mom about facing reality, that's when things went bad. For Jacob, like many children of divorce, a quiet night always meant terrible news in the morning. Was it any wonder that he had filled up his life with parties, noise, busyness, activity? That's how Jacob handled his emotions. Over the years, this former self-prescribed therapy had worked for him. He kept his schedule full, and he never slowed down, existing in a firestorm of activity. And then his mother died, and he was starting life where every second was filled, and none of it had meaning. The things he missed now, he never expected to miss. He missed the cards that she sent on his birthday. He missed the way her voice sounded on a late-night phone call. She could never remember what time zone he was in. He missed sitting in her room and the sound of the ventilator moving up and down in their final days together. And although he could barely remember a time when she was healthy, when she was normal, she was still his mom. He would not have traded her for all the healthy moms in the world. So Jacob laid down on the bed and tried to breathe through his discomfort. At least in Paris he could go for a walk, drown himself in the lights and the noise of Paris. In the Rubenstein-Goldblatt household, he was just stuck. There was nowhere to escape the silence. He needed something to distract him, so he decided to freshen up. It had been a long flight from Paris, plus he could smell the chicken soup and kugel from dinner embedded in his skin. Heading into the hallway, he found the linen closet, and next to it, the door to Rachel's room was closed. He wondered what she was doing in there. He even thought about knocking to see if she was still up, but like with Shmuel, he quickly realized that this was a terrible idea. Rachel was clearly uninterested in him, plus it was creepy standing outside her door listening for breathing. So quickly he moved away from the door. Finding the bathroom, Jacob began getting undressed. Much like her old bedroom, this bathroom clearly remained Rachel's domain. A dozen different types of moisturizers and scented soaps lined the sink. It was interesting. Many parents reclaimed their children's room and extra space in the house the moment that their adult children flew the nest. Rachel's family was the opposite. This was still her room from childhood, her bathroom. And even though they clearly needed the space for out-of-town visitors, their beloved daughter always took first dibs. He wondered what it would have been like having parents so clearly who wanted you to come home to visit, everything designed as an open invitation for you to come. Jacob leaned into the moisturizers and carefully pulled one from among the mess. Bringing it to his nose, he tried to find her scent. Apple and buttercream with tints of honey. It reminded him of Rosh Hashanah. He went to put it back, focusing attention on a green bottle with aloe when the door to the bathroom came flying open. Moisturizer bottles went crashing to the floor. "Oh my God," Rachel said, covering her eyes with one hand. "What are you doing?" I was showering," Jacob said. "On Shabbat?" He was confused. "Am I not supposed to shower on Shabbat?" I mean, you can. It's a thing with the water heater, but like, can you put a shirt on or something? Jacob obeyed and reached for his sweater to throw it back on, but the sound of Rachel screaming, combined with the crash of 2 dozen moisturizer bottles, must have awoken the house. Seconds later, at the end of the hall, the door creaked open. "Oh no," Rachel said and pushed him inside the bathroom. Jacob fell onto the toilet seat. "What the?" she said and put one finger to her mouth. Jacob had no idea what was going on. The woman who had barely spoken to him at dinner had suddenly morphed into someone else entirely. With both hands pressed up against his naked chest, Rachel used her foot to close the door and flipped on a light switch. "Are you out of your mind?" Jacob asked. "I don't want my mother knowing about this," Rachel whispered. "About what?" he asked, still totally confused. "This," she said, whispering into the blacklist. "Do you know what a honey badger is?" "Yes." "Well, if you make any noise, I will shove a honey badger down your throat." Rachel stared at the door and listened for footsteps. Dr. Rubenstein was at the door, hovering like a helicopter on police patrol. Through the pitch-black darkness, he listened to Rachel breathe. In and out. In and out. Jacob couldn't help thinking about their first kiss in this moment. The footsteps diminished back down the hallway. With silence once again falling over the house, Rachel released Jacob from her grip, flipping the light back on. Jacob was flabbergasted. You touched the light." "So?" Rachel squinted in his direction. "So what are you, the Shabbat police or something?" "No, I just didn't expect you to do that." "Yeah, well," Rachel said, rolling her eyes, "I live to subvert your expectations, I guess." Jacob took a careful accounting of the woman standing across from him. The fierceness in her demeanor did not match the pink footy pajamas that she was wearing right now. He couldn't help wondering if she had a secret identical twin stashed in the attic somewhere, someone they only let out at night. "I need to talk to you," she said, crossing her arms against her chest, "and it's important." "Considering that you have me trapped half naked in the bathroom, I guess I'm all ears." Rachel huffed out these words. "I need a ticket to the Matzah ball." "What?" Jacob laughed. You can't actually be serious right now." "Jacob!" She stomped her foot on the pink fuzzy mat. "I am serious. I need a freaking ticket to your Matzah ball." Jacob was floored into silence. She was serious. Who was Rachel Rubenstein Goldblatt? The thought tumbled inside him like laundry. "Tell me why you need it," he demanded. "What?" she asked, stepping back. "Tell me why you need a ticket to the Matzah ball so badly." He could see her thinking, processing his request. "My parents are old," she said finally, "and they're very frail, and I need to go to the Matzah ball to help them and make sure they don't trip or get themselves hurt." "Really?" he deadpanned. "New York can be very dangerous for the elderly, and the last time my father was in the city, he almost got mugged by a gang from the circus." "Your father," he repeated carefully, "almost got mugged by a gang from the circus?" "My parents don't really like to talk about it." "Seriously, Rachel." "All right," she snapped back at him. "Fine, I'll tell you the truth." He was waiting with bated breath. "I can't tell you, okay?" "You're unbelievable," Jacob said, rising to leave. "Jacob, no, please." She grabbed his hand, forcing him to stay. "I need a ticket. I know it doesn't make sense. I know it sounds completely bonkers, but my entire life is on the line right now, and you're the only person who can help me. If I ever meant anything to you at all, please help me get a ticket to the Matzah ball." Jacob felt his stomach dip. The feel of her hand and the memory of those hazy Shabbat afternoons together came flooding back to him. He had loved her once, in that innocent first love sort of way. The feeling overtook him completely, and he floated back to their first kiss and then standing on the dance floor completely alone. A dual instinct rose up inside him. He had a matzah ball to organize. He didn't have time for love or romance. Plus, Rachel Rubenstein Goldblatt had already broken his heart once. But staring into those familiar brown eyes, a thought arose from deep within him. A lesson learned from his mother sitting there upon his heart. Life was too short to waste a second of it. "I can't give you a ticket," Jacob said gently. "But honestly, like I explained at dinner, we're completely sold out, and as much as I would like to help you, we have limits on numbers. There are health and fire codes for a reason. Letting people in at the last minute could get us into big trouble and could endanger people. All that being said, I do have another option for you. We reserve tickets for volunteers, so if you'd be willing to help us out over the next week, we have a space open for one more volunteer." "A volunteer?" "You give me 8 days of your time." Jacob met her eyes directly. "You volunteer for the matzah ball, and providing that you do a good job, I'll give you a ticket." What the heck? Oh. All right, so we're getting somewhere. Chapter 8. Rachel tiptoed back to her bedroom, quiet as a church mouse. She shut the door behind her and leaned her head against the wood paneling. Despite this victory, she did not feel triumphant. Her anxiety was spiraling, reaching endemic proportions. 8 days with Jacob Greenberg, 8 days volunteering full-time with chronic fatigue syndrome. There weren't enough drugs in the world to get her through this. Closing her eyes, she balled up her fists on her side. There it was again, that chronic illness calculator in her brain. Today had been a good day. Rachel had sprinted through New York, commuted to Long Island, attended a Shabbat dinner. She actually didn't even feel terrible in this moment. That had been a good day precisely because she had conserved 3 days worth of energy, thanks be to Mickey, before today by remaining in her home and resting. She would not have had that luxury volunteering in setting up the matzo ball. Crawling back into bed, she was determined to focus on the positive. She had a ticket to the matzo ball, yet, or better yet, she had 8 days full of Hanukkah research and inspiration ahead of her. She'd figure out the rest. Rachel heard the water turn on in the bathroom. Jacob really was showering, in the same shower that she used when she stayed over at her parents' house. Oh, how she wished her parents' house was bigger. If only her mother had seen fit to buy a house with 3 full bathrooms 35 years ago. But property was expensive on Long Island, and her Ima had fallen in love with the expansive dining room close to the synagogue, where she could spend the rest of her natural life welcoming visitors. Now Rachel suffered, groaning aloud as she dug her head into the pillow, her head beneath the pillow. The water pinged and dinged in the distance, hitting tiles, hitting skin, stoking her already overactive imagination. The last thing that Rachel wanted to do was think about a sexy Jacob, naked and wet, rubbing her soap all over his junk. She couldn't help herself. Her mind wandered. The memory of his naked chest and those perfect pectoral muscles flexing beneath her hands arose in her imagination. The possibility of them going further, kissing one more time. She stopped herself right there. She needed something to take her mind off the obvious, and Rachel reached for her purse. Not wanting to arouse suspicion, she refrained from turning on the light. She used her hands to guide her, feeling through her bag as she pushed her fingers past her wallet and notebook and compact before finding her cell phone. Jackpot. She pulled the pink covers all the way over her head, and beneath the safety of her sheets, she breathed in deeply. She felt like the worst daughter in the world. It would have been bad enough disrespecting her parents and their beliefs by using her phone on Shabbat. Worse, though, she was going to use her phone on Shabbat to watch Christmas movies. Alas, this was the problem with addiction. Rachel was powerless when it came to Santa. She had asked her father about it once. After she signed her first contract with Romance House, she had come home fully expecting to sit down her parents and her brother, who was also a rabbi, and tell them the truth. And then during Shabbat dinner, Rachel made a mistake. She asked her father about the halakha, or the Jewish religious law, surrounding someone like Irving Berlin, the Jewish composer who wrote Christmas music. Her brilliant rabbinical father, as he was wont to do, went on a whole long diatribe.
Judaism has survived thousands of years thanks to an almost obsessive rejection of assimilation.
Rachel's version of Judaism, the kind that she had been raised with, allowed her to exist somewhere in the middle. She was Jewish and American, but there was always this fear lingering in the background of that straddling. It was fear that became palpable, especially after the Holocaust, that Judaism and the survival of the Jewish people was on a slippery slope, and the continuity of their faith and their peoplehood could be lost as simply as the placement of a Christmas garland upon the mantle. Was it a fair fear? Rachel really had no idea. She lived in a Jewish world with Jewish friends and a tight-knit Jewish community. It was still enough of an anxiety for her parents that Christmas books, Christmas songs, Christmas movies, and even Hanukkah decor that mimicked Christmas styling were forbidden in her house growing up. Powering on her phone, Rachel found her Hallmark movie app. Opening it up, her guilt floated away. All her Christmas darlings were there. She melted into one of her favorites, a movie about a retired pianist sent to educate the daughter of a grumpy prince. She loved the story specifically because it was just so darn unrealistic. The grumpy prince mourning the death of his first wife, the snarky daughter who brings them all together during the Christmas ball. She adored it all. The angels disguised as friends, pushing you toward your destiny. The Christmas prince starting out as your enemy before he sweeps you off your feet. Rachel wanted a prince. She wanted somebody to appear out of nowhere and give her make-believe happy endings. She dreamed of a perfect little snow globe world where she was never sick, and even if she was, someone else would do the laundry. It seemed so simple, really. The shower at the end of the hall turned off, and Rachel hit pause on her movie, listening for footsteps. How ironic, she thought, that she had first developed her love of Christmas after that disastrous summer with Jacob. The details of what happened were insignificant compared to where they eventually led, but Rachel had returned home from camp that summer a jumble of confused tween feelings. Her mother used her background as a reproductive endocrinologist and tried to help. She bought her countless books with titles like What's Happening to My Body and It's Totally Normal. She pulled two giant felt She pulled out two giant felt genitalia puppets, digging her hand inside and giving them disturbing character voices in order to expand on every aspect of human sexuality to her developing daughter. And while those books and the puppet shows could explain the physical changes of puberty and adolescence, none of them made sense to a developing heart. She needed someone to talk to about love. She needed to understand how she could go from good and dutiful rabbi's daughter to launching underwear up a flagpole. But lying in bed that night and sneaking Christmas movies, Rachel understood. It all came from the same instinct, really. Jacob Greenberg, with his outrageous antics and complete disregard for camp rules, had seen the truth inside her. She was not a nice Jewish girl. She was not the dutiful rabbi's daughter. Indeed, sometimes it felt like all Rachel wanted to do was kick down every fence around the Torah that her family had built. Jacob was merely the outlet, and Rachel liked it. She liked filling his shampoo bottles with ketchup. She liked stealing his underwear and letting it wave like a flag, the way that the girls' bunk in 7G had screeched aloud at the sight. She adored the feeling of being naughty and laying her sweatshirt on her lap during movie nights and let Jacob sneak his hand beneath the material. The feeling of his hand, sweaty fingers searching to find her before wrapping his fingers around her own hand. She wanted to be even naughtier with him, and when Jacob asked her to meet him one night in secret down by the lake, Rachel had gone. Like a biblical story of Dinah, Rachel went out, and then, like all biblical women before her, hell-bent on leaving the security of their tribal tents, in an unabashed act of self-determination, Rachel was promptly punished. Returning home to Long Island, she had every reason in the world to hate him. And yet, she thought about Jacob constantly. The memory of him overtook her and caused her to break down into hysterics, even though her devotion to him made no logical sense. If this was love, if this spinning hurtful thing was all she had to look forward to in the future, well, then she planned on remaining celibate. Finally, in early November, Rachel was well enough to go to her local library, and she had always been an avid reader. And nearing 13 years old, she was quickly outgrowing the children's section. So she walked inside and saw a circular table. It was loaded down with beautiful books displayed on a tablecloth of red, and above those books a giant white poster board decorated with evergreen trees and floating Santa heads. There was the words, "Fall in love this Christmas." Rachel remembered the feeling as she walked up toward the table. Her heart was racing, and she picked up one of the books. It was an image on the cover that drew her in. A man in a knitted hat held a smiling woman in a red sweater close. Snowflakes fell all around them, a dreamy camp-like setting in the background, and they angled their lips together. It was so obvious from the body language that they were about to kiss. But unlike Rachel, the woman on the cover didn't look like she was going to be spending the next 8 weeks bawling her eyes out. Rachel needed to know more. Glancing around her, that naughty feeling she discovered with Jacob appeared again, and she made sure that there were no congregants lurking about. And then, knowing full well what she was doing was something her mother would not approve of, she checked out that book, and she devoured it in one night. Before long, she was reading every Christmas romance novel she could find. She was watching the Hallmark movies alongside her novels, and all of this in secret. And then, while a freshman in college in the middle of her first semester studying writing, Rachel fell ill. In a span of a few weeks, she went from a straight A student at the top of her class to sleeping 20 hours in a day. She had night sweats and swollen lymph nodes and massive weight loss and sore throats, and she returned home to Long Island and began the lengthy process of medical evaluations and testing. Eventually, the doctors diagnosed her with chronic fatigue syndrome. Rachel was far too sick at the beginning of her disease to even think about the future, or writing, or Christmas. She simply slept. She slept for months, a regular sleeping beauty, only waking up for doctor's appointments. But by summer, the fog she existed in began to fade. She could only get out of bed and go for a walk, or she could finally get out of bed and go for a walk, or write. Though she would never return to the pre-illness level of wellness she had, she could have some version of normal. It was in that hazy ending of summer that she made two important decisions about her life. The first was to keep her diagnosis a secret, not because she was ashamed, she knew her illness was real, but because she had suddenly been handed a diagnosis that did not at all reflect her personal experience. Names were important. They came with histories and legacies. This name would not be doing her any favors. Her second decision was related to the first and focused on simple practicalities. Although dreams don't die just because your body fails you, Rachel understood the limits of her own physicality. She felt the limitations on her time, especially. There just wasn't enough energy in her life to do everything that she wanted. And so, that evening, in the quiet of her childhood bedroom, she confronted her new normal. She wrote down 3 things that she wanted to focus on for her future: a writing career, a partner, and children. And then she crossed off 2. For the next 3 years, Rachel went to college part-time, using her summers to pick up extra credits, never telling anyone the truth about her disease. She gave up on dating and Shabbat dinners with friends, spending her weeknights and free time in bed, saving up her energy for the coming week. She funneled any good days she had and extra energy into her writing. Rachel spent most of college desperately trying to write a book that would sell. She had all sorts of close calls and false starts, including an agent who had dumped her via text message. But mainly, and no matter how many manuscripts Rachel pumped out, publishing was one giant disappointment. One day, in her senior year, feeling awful about everything, she found herself watching a Christmas movie. It was like the clouds opened up and Santa himself came down from the heavens to bless this new endeavor with Yuletide inspiration. She sold her first book to Romance House 6 months later. It was an easy jump. Christmas filled a void and turned her painful daily struggles into a tolerable reality. No one was ever sick in her Christmas romances. No one was ever heartbroken by the antics of a childhood sociopath. And indeed, no one was even Jewish. She didn't have to be Rachel Rubinstein Goldblatt in her novels. No, Christmas provided the ultimate escape. Rachel heard Jacob return to his bedroom, and sighing heavily, she glanced over at the clock sitting on her nightstand. It was late. She shut off her movie. Like always, her happy endings would have to wait. Well, that was sad. I think we have time for one more. Poor Rachel. Chapter 9. That night, Jacob dreamed. He dreamed of a dessert. A great pit. Oh, sorry, a desert, not a dessert. It'd be better if he was dreaming of dessert. He dreamed of a desert, of a great pit he'd fallen into and couldn't escape from. He dreamed of tigers, 12 in total, all with faces like the investors from the Matzah ball. He dreamed of his mother, her voice in the distance calling his name. The dreams themselves weren't that unusual. Jacob had long been plagued by nightmares, but now they were kind of turning biblical. Jacob awoke to the sound of dishes clanging in the kitchen and blinked open his eyes and shook off his nightmares. He wasn't sure if this was jet lag or the creaky queen-size bed beneath him, but he did not sleep well. Despite the ease with which Dr. Rubinstein had welcomed her into his home, he felt unsettled. He sat up on the corner of his bed, rubbing out the tension from his forehead. He recalled the events of last night. Rachel was tackling him, half naked in the bathroom, begging for a ticket to the Matzah ball. He couldn't believe he agreed to let her volunteer for his Matzah ball. She certainly didn't deserve his help, and yet after all this time, Rachel still managed to throw him off his game. Rising from the bed, he pulled out a smart blue blazer from his suit and paired it with a cashmere sweater and pleated pants. Taking one last look at himself in the mirror above the bureau, he adjusted his collar, fixed his hair so that his auburn curls fell away from his eyes. He was a good-looking man, which paired with thriving multi-million-dollar business meant that he had never had much trouble with women, except when it came to Rachel. Jacob shook the thought away, heading for the kitchen, where he found Dr. Rubenstein still in a house robe, setting out the plates for breakfast. "Oh, Jacob," she said, rushing over to give him a hug. "Shabbat shalom." Jacob couldn't help himself. He fell into her embrace. It had been so long since he had been hugged, since he felt the genuine arms of a mother wrapping around him. He didn't realize how much he missed it.
Shabbat shalom,"
Jacob said warmly. "Would you like a little breakfast?" she asked, her hands still on his arms.
I'm okay, actually.
"Oh, come on now," she said. "You're a growing boy. You should eat a little something. We won't be eating again until Kiddush." Kiddush was literally 3 hours away, but not wanting to be rude, Jacob took a seat. God forbid you left a Jewish household hungry. There was no greater sin. In return, Dr. Rubenstein began spinning, shifting from refrigerator to drawer to pantry. She loaded up the table, a veritable buffet of fruits, cookies, and jams.
Is there anything I can help you with?"
Jacob asked. "Oh, I'm fine, dear." Dr. Rubenstein glanced back from the pantry. "Please, start eating." Jacob hesitated.
"You don't want me to wait for you?"
"No, I had a little nosh before you woke up."
Jacob stared at the table full of food. "And, Rachel?"
Dr. Rubenstein came to a full and complete stop. It shouldn't have been a difficult question. The woman had put out enough food to feed a small army. Rachel?" she asked, her voice rising an octave.
"I'm assuming that she'll be joining us for breakfast before services?"
Dr. Rubenstein turned bright red. "Oh, no," she said, twisting toward the sink. "It's just, well, Rachel doesn't usually do Shabbat services on Saturday morning. We'll probably see her later, either at Kiddush or this evening at Havdalah." He was surprised to hear this. Jacob would have thought that the rabbi's daughter would be all gung-ho about attending Shabbat services. It was strange that someone raised in an observant home would choose to sleep in. Jacob reasoned it away as yet another mystery regarding Rachel. "Ow," Dr. Rubenstein said, touching her forehead. "I almost forgot." Heading to the counter, she stood on tiptoe, pulling down a pink box wrapped in white twine. "I got these for you," she said, sliding down in the seat next to him. "They're kosher. You know that fabulous little bakery in Brooklyn? That one that's been in the family for 5 generations? Well, I had them make this specially for you." Jacob was touched. Pulling at the pink box, he opened it, and inside were a dozen fresh croissants.
"Dr. Rubenstein," Jacob said, shaking his head, "you didn't need to do this."
She waved away his concern. "I figured it would be nice for you to have a little taste of home." Home. The words fell from her lips and landed like a sledgehammer on his gut. Jacob stared down at the croissants. France had not felt like home in some time. It wasn't just the anti-Semitism rising in both Paris and around the world. It was the death of his mother, and since losing her, his world had been turned upside down. Still, the gesture was so kind, so sweet. It broke through his carefully constructed walls.
"This is too much, Dr. Rubenstein."
"You know, in Judaism, they say that every person has their mitzvah, one good deed they do above all others. For some, it's keeping kosher. For some, it's visiting the sick. This is mine, Jacob. I like Shabbat. I like having visitors." She smiled, leaning into him. "And I especially like you." Jacob believed her. "Now," she said, rising from the table, "I'm gonna go get dressed for services. You hurry up and eat breakfast, and after that, we'll all walk over together, all right?" Jacob watched Dr. Rubenstein flitter off. The house returned to that uncomfortable quiet he so desperately hated. At least the sun was shining. The light streamed through the curtains of the kitchen, casting colors across the table of food that Dr. Rubenstein had so lovingly set out just for him. Shmuel had once remarked that when you marry a Jewish woman, you marry their family. Jacob had never really understood the sentiment before, but picking up a croissant, he smiled at the thought. Dr. Rubenstein would make a really good mother-in-law to somebody. She would welcome them into her home with open arms and way too much food. Alas, given his trajectory with her daughter, it was unlikely to be him. Looking back on it now, he could see what a troubled kid he had been. He pulled pranks often at the expense of others. He was out of control, demanding attention, begging for someone to take notice. But he reasoned his bad behavior hadn't been entirely his fault. His mother had been sick, prone not only to physical problems like incontinence, but falls of depression that often accompanied chronic and life-altering diseases. His father, the same man who used to take him to Mets games and once even bought him a retired mascot costume in the shape of a baseball, had stopped coming home entirely. He was a broken kid from a broken family, and in his darkest days he even thought about ending himself. Jacob had never considered going to camp until one day during Hebrew school they were handing out brochures. For most everyone in his class, Camp Ahava was akin to 8 straight weeks of punishment, the place where the super Jewy kids went, where they forced you to pray 3 times a day and sat around doing nothing for all of Shabbat. Nobody from his surroundings went to such religious camps. Jacob had taken one look at that brochure with its focus on community, its beautifully manicured lawns and happy smiling faces, and he begged his mother to let him go. He pleaded and cried, pouring his life savings of $26.37 out onto her bed before calling his bubby. And eventually they all agreed that Camp Ahava would be a good break for everyone involved. Jacob understood that his parents were using the summer to finalize their divorce. He didn't know that 4 months later he would be moving to Paris. Arriving at Camp Ahava that summer, his bag was stuffed full of swim trunks and itching powder. Jacob found his escape there. He burst onto the scene, making friends and falling in love. He couldn't help himself. His mind wandered back to the first time he saw Rachel. It was during opening ceremonies in the outdoor arena by the lake. Their counselors were performing a skit on stage. Everyone was whooping and hollering, making a racket, except for this one girl sitting directly across from him. Her frizzy brown hair was in a high ponytail, and her hands were folded politely in her lap, but she was barely smiling. Even at 12 years old, it struck him as a little odd. Who comes to camp and acts so austere? Later, he would learn from his newfound friends exactly who she was. Rachel Rubenstein Goldblatt. She was the daughter of the Rabbi Aaron Goldblatt. He had no idea who that was, nor did he have any interest in discussing the fathers with the boys of Bunk 7B. But in great and excitable detail, they warned him off of her. Rachel was nice and all, the type of camper who was always willing to share her water bottle with you and also completely boring. She picked up sidurs after service. She went to bed exactly at lights out. Plus, everybody knew, since it was written in the Talmud, if you touched Rabbi Goldblatt's daughter during summer camp, you would get struck by lightning. It seemed that there were good and logical reasons to avoid that skinny girl with the high ponytail, but Jacob saw something in Rachel that the others did not. He recognized in her quiet, almost self-imposed solitude from others at camp, almost a kindred spirit. They were 12, Avery. They're 12 years old, yeah. They were both hiding, and they just had a different way of hiding. Rachel used silence. Jacob, like always, he reasoned, used noise. Perhaps pushing her into the lake was not his finest moment, but it had worked. Rachel emerged from those waters, all colorful dichotomy, fireworks exploding up into the sky on the 4th of July, and he adored the mischievous little smile she shot him during services. He thought her pranks were brilliant. He liked her so much, in fact, that he came to adore the smell of ketchup in his hair and the feeling of toothpaste in his sneakers. She was like one of those fireflies that sometimes got caught together in secret down by the lake. The little spark of brilliance, a wild, underestimated creature zipping by in the night. He needed her light that summer. Jacob never told Rachel, or anyone at Camp Ahava for that matter, the truth about his home life, but Rachel seemed to have a sixth sense about everything he was going through. When Jacob had nightmares about his mother and he awoke to find toothpaste in his sneakers, when mail day came and everyone else got letters from their fathers, Jacob would return to his bunk to take a shower and find ketchup in his shampoo. She was still that good-natured and thoughtful girl that all the boys in Bunk 7B had described, but she was also terrifically fun. Most nights, he went to bed with his cheeks aching from laughter, and when Jacob felt alone in the world, Rachel laid her sweatshirt in her lap and let him take her hand. He would always and forever cherish the memory of their first kiss. He was 12 years old in the throes of his first love, and he was certain that their love was really, really real. And then for no reason that he could ever understand, she disappeared from his life. She ghosted him completely, refusing to take his phone calls or answer any of his letters. After standing him up at the Camp Ahava final dance, it broke his goddamn heart. And yet, despite the myriad of ways that she had abandoned him, Jacob wasn't angry at Rachel. Indeed, it was the opposite. He felt keenly that he owed her something, that a debt of the most valuable kind had to be repaid, because that summer, Rachel had saved his life. Dr. Rubenstein returned to the kitchen fully dressed for Shabbat services. "Is everything all right?" she asked, and Jacob cleared his throat. "No, fine. Sorry, I was just thinking about the last time that I was in New York." "Oh, it's been a long time, Nashon." He nodded. In all his travels around the world, all his visits to Meccas for mega events, Jacob had purposefully avoided returning to the city where his father still resided. And then for no reason in particular, Dr. Rubenstein hugged him, and he accepted it fully. Whatever questions still lingered inside him, whatever demons still needed to be confronted, would have to be saved for another time. For unlike Rachel, Jacob had grown up in a world where there were both gods and monsters, and he was determined more than ever to remain on the side of the good. It's very well done, but also a little bit saddy pants, right? It's so good, but just a little bit, like, it like tugs at your heartstrings, just, you know, like, it's just a little sad. Does anyone else feel like we need a good old Hanukkah miracle to perk us back up? You know? Makes me a little bit sad. Just a little bit. We have had a good run of books, yes. It's been a while since we've had a bad book, which is great for us, I think, Jen. Yeah, no, of course, that is what makes it so good, Avery. I'm just teasing. But it is great. It's a good listen, right? I mean, the characters are well fleshed out. They all have ups and downs. It's nice. It's nice. It's a good one. Good choice. Good choice, you guys. I didn't pick this. You guys picked this. So good on all of you. All right. Well, I got a skadooch because we have Roll for Slime later, and I gotta go to the post office, among other things. But I will see you all at 4:30 over on the other app, because it is a locked live, because it's 18 plus. So don't bring your kids, but come ready to have some fun. And I think that's kind of the whole kit and caboodle. We'll read more tomorrow, like we do. See you later, guys.